The invitation arrived in a silver envelope, slipped under the door of their cramped apartment like a snake. Layla Hassan picked it up with trembling fingers, her mother Amina watching from the kitchen doorway, hands still dripping with dishwater. "What is it?" Amina asked softly. Layla unfolded the card. Cream-colored paper, embossed gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to serve at the Royal Gala, Palace of Al-Rashid. White attire required. Report to service entrance, 6 p.m. sharp." Her mother's face went pale. "No, throw it away." "Mama, I said no." Amina crossed the small room in 3 strides and snatched the card. "This is a trap. They're mocking us." Layla had heard the whispers. The palace staff enjoyed their games. The housekeeper's daughter, hired for one night only, dressed up like she belonged, then humiliated in front of royalty. It was entertainment for the bored and cruel. But the envelope also contained something else. $500. Cash. More money than they'd seen in months. "We need this," Layla whispered. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Not like this. Not for their amusement. Yet 3 days later, Layla stood outside the palace gates anyway, wearing the only white dress she owned, a second-hand cotton shift her mother had scrubbed until it gleamed. The palace loomed before her, its golden domes catching the desert sunset like crowns of fire. Fountains sparkled in the courtyard. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. Ferraris, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed between them. Layla swallowed her fear and walked toward the service entrance. Inside, the head butler, a man named Rashid with a permanent sneer, looked her up and down with disgust. "You're the maid's daughter." "Yes, sir." "Can you even read?" He handed her a clipboard. Layla's cheeks burned, but she signed her name in careful script. Behind Rashid, 2 younger staff members snickered. "She thinks she's Cinderella," one whispered. "Wait until Prince Tariq sees her," the other replied. "He requested this personally." Layla's blood went cold. Prince Tariq al-Rashid, the youngest son of the Sultan, famous for his cruelty disguised as charm. She'd heard stories. Women dismissed for refusing his advances. Staff humiliated for sport. And now he'd summoned her. The gala hall gleamed like something from a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings painted with constellations. White roses everywhere, thousands of them, their scent thick as perfume. Tables draped in silk. Champagne towers catching the light like liquid gold. Guests arrived in waves. Diplomats, oil magnates, European royalty, all dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The men wore traditional white thobes embroidered with gold thread. The women glittered with jewelry that could buy entire neighborhoods. Layla was assigned to the beverage station, pouring champagne and water with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The other servers ignored her, their silence a wall she couldn't breach. Then Prince Tariq entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his beard trimmed to perfection. His eyes were dark and restless, scanning the room like a hunter seeking prey. When his gaze landed on Layla, he smiled, not warmly, like a cat spotting a mouse. "You?" he called across the hall. "Come here." Every head turned. Layla's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to walk toward him, tray balanced carefully in her hands. "Your name?" he asked. "Layla Hassan, Your Highness." "Hassan." He repeated it slowly, tasting the syllables. "And your mother cleans the palace kitchens, doesn't she?" "Yes, Your Highness." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. A woman in emeralds whispered loudly, "How quaint! He's hired the help's offspring." Tariq's smile widened. Tell me, Layla Hassan, do you know how to serve royalty? Or did they forget to teach you that in whatever hovel you crawled out of?" The room erupted in laughter. Layla's vision blurred with tears, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm here to serve your highness, whatever you require." "Good." He plucked a glass from her tray and handed it to a nearby guest without looking at her. "Stay close. I have plans for you tonight." As he walked away, Layla felt the weight of 100 stares. Pity from some, amusement from most. She wanted to run, to disappear into the desert night. But her mother's face flashed in her mind. The hospital bills, the rent, the empty refrigerator. She stayed. An hour later, as the dinner service began, Layla moved between tables, refilling glasses, clearing plates, invisible except when someone wanted to mock her. A diplomat complimented her dress with dripping sarcasm. A socialite asked if she'd stolen the silverware yet. Through it all, Layla kept her head high, her hands steady, her expression calm. Somewhere deep inside, she heard another voice, her grandfather's voice. Layla sat cross-legged on a worn carpet in a small house that smelled of cardamom and old books. Across from her, General Khalid Hassan adjusted his reading glasses, his weathered hands tracing lines on a map spread between them. "Tell me again, Hayati," he said gently, "where did Napoleon make his mistake?" "He underestimated the winter," Layla answered. "He thought power and numbers were enough." The old general smiled. "And what did that teach us?" "That arrogance is the greatest weakness, that those who are underestimated often hold the advantage." Her grandfather reached across the map and tapped her forehead gently. "Never forget, Layla. You carry the blood of warriors. Your great-great-grandfather rode with Lawrence. Your grandmother stood against tyrants when men twice her size cowered. Poverty does not erase lineage. Humiliation does not erase worth." He pulled out a small leather journal, its pages filled with careful Arabic script. "This belonged to my father, Captain Rashid Hassan. He was a military strategist during the Revolution. They called him the Silent Fox because he never announced his plans. He simply outthought everyone." Layla traced the faded gold embossing on the cover. "What happened to him?" "He died defending men who would never remember his name." The general's voice was soft but firm. "But his strategies, his teachings, they live on, in me, and now in you." He opened the journal to a page filled with diagrams. "Khalid, these are not just battle plans. They are lessons in reading people, in seeing what others miss, in turning weakness into strength." Over the years that followed, General Khalid taught Layla everything: how to observe without being noticed, how to listen for what people didn't say, how to memorize faces, names, patterns, how to remain calm when the world pressed down. "Why are you teaching me this, Jadi?" she asked once. "Because the world underestimates girls like you," he replied, "and that, Hayati, is your greatest weapon." The memory steadied her. Layla moved through the gala with new eyes, no longer seeing just wealth and cruelty, but patterns. She noticed which guests spoke to which, who held real power and who only performed it. She memorized faces, listened to fragments of conversation in Arabic, French, English, and she noticed something else. Prince Tariq kept glancing at a specific table where 3 men in expensive suits sat speaking in low, urgent tones. Every time he looked, his jaw tightened. Near midnight, the entertainment began. A famous violinist performed, then a troupe of traditional dancers. The crowd applauded politely, already drunk on champagne and self-satisfaction. That's when Prince Tariq stood and tapped his glass with a knife. The hall fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the vaulted ceiling, "tonight we celebrate not just wealth and power, but also humility." He smiled cruelly. "I've invited someone special to demonstrate the difference between those who belong here and those who serve us." Layla's stomach dropped. "Layla Hassan," he called, "come forward." Every eye turned to her. Whispers erupted like wildfire. She wanted to refuse to walk out, but Rashid the butler stood blocking the service door, arms crossed. Slowly, Layla walked to the center of the hall. The crowd parted around her like a sea. Tariq gestured to a small platform near the orchestra. "You see, my friends, I discovered something interesting about our little servant. Apparently, her grandfather was some minor military officer, a nobody who thought he mattered." Laughter echoed. Layla's hands clenched into fists. "So tonight," Tariq continued, "I thought we'd test whether low-born blood carries any real intelligence. Layla, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Questions any educated person should answer. If you succeed, I'll donate $10,000 to the charity of your choice." He paused for effect. "If you fail, you leave, immediately, without pay." The room buzzed with excitement. This was the entertainment they'd been waiting for. Layla met his gaze. Something in her eyes made his smile falter for just a heartbeat. "I accept, Your Highness." Tariq's confidence returned. "Excellent. Question 1. He gestured to a large painting on the wall, a desert battle scene. "Tell me, what battle is depicted here, and who was the commanding officer?" Layla studied the painting for only a moment. "The Battle of Aqaba, 1917, commanded by Emir Faisal and T.E. Lawrence. But the actual tactical planning was done by Captain Rashid Hassan, my great-great-grandfather." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tariq's smile tightened. "Lucky guess. Question 2. He snapped his fingers, and a servant brought forward an ornate sword. "Identify this weapon." Layla stepped closer, her heart pounding. The blade was curved, the hilt wrapped in aged leather. She recognized the maker's mark immediately. A shamshir, Persian origin, approximately 18th century. Judging by the inscription, it belonged to a member of the Qajar dynasty, likely a ceremonial piece, though the edge suggests it saw combat. Silence. Someone in the back began to clap slowly, uncertainly. Tariq's face darkened. "One more." His voice was cold now. "This is a passage from a military treaty. Translate it out loud." He handed her a paper covered in Arabic script. Layla recognized it instantly, not because it was common, but because her grandfather had made her read this exact text 100 times. She began reading, her voice clear and steady, translating from classical Arabic to English. Article 7. The strength of a nation lies not in its weapons, but in the honor of those who wield them. A leader who humiliates his people for sport is no leader at all, but a coward wearing a borrowed crown. The hall erupted. Some guests laughed nervously. Others stared at Prince Tariq, who had gone pale. Before he could respond, the main doors opened with a crash. An older man entered, flanked by guards. He wore the white robes of a sultan, but simpler, without ostentation. His presence commanded instant silence. "Father?" Tariq stammered. Sultan Rashid al-Rashid walked slowly into the hall, his gaze sweeping over the frozen guests before landing on Layla. "What is your name, child?" he asked gently. "Layla Hassan, Your Majesty." The Sultan's eyes widened. Hassan, of the Darfur Hassans? Yes, Your Majesty. My grandfather was General Khalid Hassan. The Sultan closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. When he opened them, they glistened with tears. Khalid, the silent fox. He turned to the stunned crowd. 40 years ago, when I was a young officer, my unit was ambushed in the northern desert. We were outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded. We would have died to the last man if not for General Khalid Hassan, who rode through enemy fire to reach us. He carried me on his back for 3 miles. He saved my life and the lives of 36 men. The Sultan looked at Tariq with something close to disgust. And you invited his granddaughter here to humiliate her? For sport? Tariq's face drained of color. Father, I didn't know. You didn't care to know. The Sultan's voice was ice. You saw only a servant. You missed the daughter of heroes. He turned back to Layla and, to the shock of everyone present, bowed deeply. Forgive my son's ignorance. Your grandfather was worth 10 of any man in this room, myself included. Layla's throat tightened. He spoke of you often, Your Majesty. He said you were the bravest man he ever served beside. The Sultan smiled sadly. He was too kind. Come, walk with me. As they moved toward a quieter corner, the crowd erupted in whispers. Tariq stood frozen, his humiliation complete. Over the next hour, the Sultan and Layla spoke as old friends reunited. He asked about her grandfather's last years, shared stories she'd never heard. He learned of her mother's work, their struggles. Finally, he asked, "What do you want, Layla Hassan? Name it, and if it's within my power, it's yours." Layla thought of her mother's tired hands, the hospital bills, the apartment that leaked when it rained. But she also thought of her grandfather's words. Dignity is not given. It's taken with grace. Your Majesty, she said carefully, I want nothing for myself. But there are others like my mother, good people working in shadows. If you could see them, truly see them, that would be enough. The Sultan studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound of genuine delight. Your grandfather taught you well, very well. He turned to his chancellor. Effective immediately, Layla Hassan is appointed to the Royal Council as advisor on veteran affairs and social equity. She will have full authority to audit palace operations and recommend reforms. The chancellor's mouth fell open. Your Majesty, she's the granddaughter of the man who saved my life, the Sultan finished, and clearly more qualified than most who claim titles they never earned. He looked back at Layla. Your first task is to investigate how tonight's prank was arranged. I want names. Layla's mind flashed to the 3 men at the corner table, the ones Tariq kept glancing at nervously. I may already have them, Your Majesty. As the night concluded, guests departed in shocked silence. Prince Tariq was escorted to his quarters, his future uncertain. Layla found her mother waiting outside the service entrance, her face twisted with worry. Mama, Layla whispered. Amina pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. I heard. Everyone heard. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. Her mother pulled back, tears streaming. No, your grandfather would be so proud. 3 months later, Layla stood in a conference room overlooking the palace gardens. On the table before her lay reports detailing corruption, abuse, and neglect that had festered for decades. She'd interviewed over 200 staff members, documented their stories, built an undeniable case. The Sultan read the final page and set it down slowly. This is damning. Yes, Your Majesty. Half my administration will be implicated. Yes, Your Majesty. He smiled grimly. Good. Burn it clean. The reforms that followed shook the kingdom. Wages increased. Working conditions improved. Abusers were dismissed regardless of rank. And Layla Hassan, the maid's daughter, became known not as a prank victim, but as the voice of the forgotten. On the first anniversary of that gala, she visited her grandfather's grave. The headstone was simple: General Khalid Hassan, the silent fox, faithful until death. She placed a hand on the warm stone and whispered, "I did it, Jaddy, just like you taught me." The wind carried her words across the desert, past the palace gates, into the endless sky where warriors rest. And in the palace behind her, formerly invisible people walked with heads held high, finally seen, finally heard, finally valued. Because one girl refused to accept humiliation as her destiny. Because one grandfather's wisdom refused to die with him. Because some legacies are not erased by poverty, cruelty, or time. They simply wait for the moment when courage and injustice collide, and a new chapter begins. Layla returned to the palace the next morning, not through the service entrance, but through the main gates. Guards she didn't recognize snapped to attention, uncertainty flickering across their faces. She wore the same second-hand white dress, but somehow it no longer looked like a costume. It looked like armor. Inside, the administrative wing was already buzzing. News of her appointment had spread like wildfire. Some staff members smiled as she passed. Others averted their eyes, already calculating how her rise might threaten them. She was led to a corner office overlooking the gardens, modest by palace standards, but more space than she'd ever had in her life. A desk, a window, and on the wall, a photograph already hung and waiting. The Sultan and her grandfather, decades younger, standing beside a military vehicle in the desert. Both men grinning, arms around each other's shoulders. Layla touched the frame gently. "I won't waste this, Jaddy." A knock interrupted her thoughts. Rashid, the head butler who had sneered at her days before, stood in the doorway. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by something between respect and fear. "Miss Hassan," he said stiffly, "the Sultan has requested your presence in the council chamber." "Thank you, Rashid." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "I'll also need to schedule a meeting with you later this week. I have questions about staffing protocols." His throat worked. "Of course." As he turned to leave, she added, "Rashid?" He stopped. "My mother will continue working in the kitchens. I expect her to be treated with the same respect you'd show any member of this household. Is that understood?" A pause. Then, quietly, "Yes, Miss Hassan." The council chamber was a stark contrast to the gala hall. No chandeliers, no roses. Just a long table, leather chairs, and maps covering the walls. 6 men sat waiting, advisors and ministers who had served the Sultan for decades. Their faces ranged from curious to openly hostile. The Sultan sat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, you know why we're here. Miss Hassan has completed her preliminary audit. Layla, please proceed." She opened her folder, hand steady despite the weight of their stares. "In the past 90 days, I interviewed 214 palace employees. What I found represents a systemic failure of leadership." One of the ministers, a heavy man named Abdullah, scoffed. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, this girl has no experience in—" "General Hassan's granddaughter has my full confidence." The Sultan cut him off. "You will listen," Layla continued, her voice gaining strength. 37 staff members reported wage theft, overtime worked but never paid, bonuses promised and never delivered. 23 reported verbal abuse from supervisors. 14 reported being fired without cause when they refused inappropriate requests. She slid photographs across the table. These are the living quarters for service staff. 6 people sharing rooms designed for 2. Mold in the walls. Broken heating. This is how we house the people who keep this palace running. Another advisor, a thin man named Faisal, leaned forward. Economic realities require certain efficiencies. This isn't efficiency, Layla said coldly. This is exploitation, and it ends now. The Sultan nodded. Your recommendations? Immediate wage increases, tied to cost of living, independent oversight of hiring and firing decisions, renovated staff housing, and most importantly, a formal complaints process that doesn't require going through the same supervisors who commit the abuses. Minister Abdullah laughed harshly. Do you have any idea what this would cost? Layla met his eyes. Less than 1 royal hunting trip, less than the flowers for a single gala. These aren't luxuries, they're obligations. The room fell silent. The Sultan stood. Miss Hassan's recommendations are hereby approved. Abdullah, you'll oversee the budget reallocation. Faisal, you'll lead the facilities renovation. I want progress reports weekly. Abdullah's face purpled. Your Majesty, the other kingdoms will see this as weakness. Let them, the Sultan said quietly. Let them see that we value human dignity over gilded cages. Dismissed. As the advisors filed out muttering, the Sultan gestured for Layla to stay. You made enemies today, he said once they were alone. I know, Your Majesty. Good, he smiled. That means you're doing it right. But Layla, be careful. Power protects itself. Those men have survived decades by crushing threats before they grow. She thought of her grandfather's lessons. The silent fox never announces his plans. I'll be careful, Your Majesty, but I won't be silent. Over the following months, the resistance intensified. Anonymous notes appeared under her door, threatening her and her mother. Rumors spread that she was manipulating the Sultan, sleeping her way into influence. Twice, her office was accidentally flooded. Once, her car wouldn't start. The brake line mysteriously cut. But the reforms continued. Staff housing was renovated. Wages increased. The complaints process launched, and within the first week, 53 reports came in. Layla investigated each one personally, building cases with the patience her grandfather had taught her. And then came the breakthrough. She'd been reviewing financial records late one night when she noticed a pattern. Money allocated for staff benefits was being diverted to a shell company. The transactions were buried under layers of paperwork, but they were there, millions over the years. She followed the thread to its source, Minister Abdullah and 2 others, the same men she'd seen sitting with Prince Tariq that night at the gala. The prank. It hadn't been random cruelty, it had been a distraction. Layla worked through the night, cross-referencing dates and amounts, building an undeniable case. By dawn, she had enough to destroy them, but she also knew presenting it openly would give them time to cover their tracks, to turn the Sultan against her. She needed a different approach. She thought of her grandfather's journal, still kept in a drawer at home. The silent fox never announces his plans. He simply outthinks everyone. 3 days later, a charity gala was announced, smaller than the previous one, honoring veterans and their families. Layla personally handled the guest list, ensuring Abdullah and his conspirators were prominently invited. The night of the event, the hall glittered once more, but this time Layla stood not as a servant, but as the guest of honor. She wore a simple black dress, her mother beside her in a new outfit Layla had insisted on buying. Prince Tariq was notably absent, currently under house arrest pending investigation. As dinner concluded, the Sultan stood to speak. Tonight, we honor those who served our nation in shadows, who sacrificed without expectation of recognition. And we acknowledge those who exploit such sacrifice for personal gain. He nodded to Layla. She walked to the podium, a folder in her hands. 3 months ago, I promised to investigate how a cruel prank was arranged. What I found went far deeper than one spoiled prince. She projected documents on the screens around the room, bank statements, forged signatures, shell company registrations. For 15 years, 3 men sitting in this room have stolen money meant for palace staff. They've diverted funds, falsified records, and when my investigation got close, they tried to discredit me with threats and rumors. The room erupted. Abdullah stood, face red. This is slander. Your Majesty, this girl is seated. The Sultan's voice cut like a blade. Guards moved to flank Abdullah and his associates. Layla continued, her voice steady. Everything here has been verified by independent auditors. The evidence is undeniable. Abdullah lunged toward her, but guards restrained him. You think you matter? You're nobody, a maid's daughter playing dress-up. Layla met his fury with calm. Yes, I'm a maid's daughter, and I'm the granddaughter of a war hero, and I'm the person who saw what you thought no one would notice. She turned to the crowd. This isn't about me. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't matter because of where they came from. It's about proving that integrity doesn't require a title, and that power without accountability is just theft in expensive clothing. The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. Staff members, many of whom had never attended a gala before, stood and clapped until their hands ached. Abdullah and his conspirators were led away. The Sultan approached Layla, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Your grandfather would be very, very proud. 6 months later, Layla stood in the same council chamber, now as the Sultan's chief of staff, the youngest in the kingdom's history, the first woman, the first from outside nobility. Her mother had retired from cleaning, now overseeing the palace culinary school Layla had established for staff children. On weekends, they visited her grandfather's grave together, bringing fresh flowers and stories of victories he never lived to see. One evening, as Layla reviewed reports in her office, a young girl appeared in the doorway, maybe 10 years old, wearing a kitchen worker's uniform too big for her frame. Excuse me, Miss Hassan. Her voice was barely a whisper. Layla smiled. Come in. What's your name? Fatima. My mother works in the laundry. What can I do for you, Fatima? The girl clutched a worn notebook to her chest. I heard what you did, how you weren't afraid even when they laughed at you. I wanted to ask, do you think people like us can really change things? Layla stood and walked around the desk, kneeling so they were eye level. Fatima, can I tell you a secret? The girl nodded. The most powerful weapon in the world isn't money or armies or royal blood. It's refusing to accept that you don't matter. My grandfather taught me that. And now I'm teaching you. She gestured to the chair. Sit. Tell me your dreams. As the young girl